good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Hugh Simpson-Wells from Oxford Computer Group. I'm going to talk to you today about role management and attestation and how that leads to enhanced security, amongst other things. So this is a personal and incomplete look at how ID-driven can extend FIM or MIM. There's far too much to cover in full in time available, but I'll try and give you a taste of it and whet your appetite for more. Preamble here, I suppose this is trying to identify the business problem we're trying to solve and so on. We want to give timely and appropriate access to users, but of course keep the bad guys out. And I would say that the first thing you need before anything else is reliable synchronization of data, and that's what MIM, Microsoft Identity Manager, is all about. It used to be called FIM, Four-Point Identity Manager, but it's much the same thing. And that also offers group management, and that is a further step towards getting authorization decisions right. And then there is AAD Connect. AAD Connect is a tool which is free actually and is based on the MIM technology but with some differences, and that will synchronize your on-premises Active Directory with Azure Active Directory. So there we've got two synchronization tools which are ensuring that you've got reliable data attributes then for users and other things upon which you can base decisions about giving people access. The next stage, if you want to take it, the next step up then, I believe, is to add role management to that, which we may use the term RBAC, which is a role-based access control that has a certain amount of baggage with it, means slightly different things to different people, but the important thing is it's some kind of role management. And that's all about permissions being managed centrally according to business rules. And with that typically comes the ability to attest or certify. In other words, the ability, having brought everything to a central location, to be able to review the permissions that people have and correct it if necessary. Now, we're actually using ID-driven to provide these additional features. It's not the only thing you can use, but there's a reason for me. I'll go into it. There are various reasons for me choosing that particular product. This is the kind of thing that I'm looking at, I'm thinking about. We've got on the left, we've got our on-premises systems. On the right, we've got our cloud-based systems. Very typical for organizations to be in this hybrid kind of mode right now. We've got synchronization taking place on premises, and Microsoft Identity Manager is a good way of doing that. And we've got a number of systems like Active Directory and an HR system and so on the left there. On the right, we've got Azure Active Directory, and we're synchronizing using AD Connect between them. And we've got various cloud apps and services that we might be making use of that will be using Azure AD for its authentication and authorization decisions. So I want to focus a little bit now on the on-premises end of it. I'm by no means going to stick to just the on-premises end of it. I want to focus a little bit on that. And what I've got here is an HR system, some kind of ERP system. I actually put SAP in there, it doesn't really matter. Various other directories, and of course Active Directory. And it's quite normal to synchronize this data and to bring all of that data into our meta directory, into Microsoft Identity Manager. What we want to do with roles is to manipulate that meta directory data, that authoritative data that we've brought into a central place. We want to manipulate that and do a better job of managing it so that we can then push the resulting data back out to those systems. And in that way, centrally manage the way that authorization decisions are being made. So let's just a little bit of background here. So we already understand perhaps that MIM handles identity data which is used for authentication and authorization. By what I mean by that, users and their attributes, but also potentially groups and permissions and all sorts of things. And it can be extended to handle roles and permissions, in other words, to synchronize them. It can even be made to do role-based access control with some clever use of workflows. And in fact, we've produced a solution which does that in the past. Now, Microsoft has provided Behold, which is an addition which provides the missing RBAC features. But I want to show you ID-driven, which pretty much fills the same space, but it does it in an interesting way and offers rather more. First of all, it's cloud-based. So you take out a tenancy which sits on Azure AD, sits on your Azure AD tenancy. And it can manage straight away Azure Active Directory users and groups. And you can use a role model, you can build a role model to control group memberships. But you can also, as well as, or instead, just do certification of the existing memberships. So attestation, certification, same thing. And it also directly connects to some applications like Salesforce. So there's quite a lot of other things going on beyond the on-premises thing, which I'm initially going to focus on. It also does zone-based access control, which is all about geographical position and getting control. That's not something I'm going to talk about. I'm just calling out that it does some other stuff as well. And importantly for us, it has an API which MIM can use. So what we've done is to add a management agent, a connector, which we're going to use for connecting up with ID-driven. Conceptually, ID-driven manipulates metaverse data, but actually what it needs is another connector. What we'll do is we'll send users and permissions and information about OUs and maybe other things to ID-driven. And we'll read back permissions against users or group memberships or whatever we need to flow to target systems. So diagrammatically, it looks like this. I've invented my own symbols here, but I've got a permission being a box there. And a permission can be an application role. It might be in an ERM system that you actually have something that looks like a role or a permission or something. It could be called an application role. If you look in Active Directory, a permission is really a group. And by the way, if you look in Azure Active Directory, same thing. It could be something else. Point is that MIM is very flexible, and we can pull the data in from all of these systems and present everything as though it were a permission that can be manipulated by ID-driven, as you'll see when we get to our demo. What we can read back, well, fortunately, the API gives us the flexibility, and we've made use of this flexibility in our connector. The API gives us the flexibility to perhaps read back something that looks like a permission or a group, or it could be that we just read back some attributes against a user. The point is that we can read it back in a form which makes sense and allows us to very easily export that to where it's got to go. If it's our ERM system, it might be just a list of string list of permissions against a user. If it's Active Directory, it's going to be a group, and so on. Looking at the overall picture then, I'm just bringing in the cloud now as well. ID-driven is actually sitting in the cloud. It's sitting on Azure AD. We're already synchronizing Azure AD, and so we see that we can have a lot of other things going on. And I'll show you as much of this as I can in the time available. And the bits I'm actually going to be focusing on and will actually show you are these. I'll just show you the MIM interface. I'll show you what Active Directory, what some users and so on in Active Directory. I'll show you the HR system, a pretend ERM system for the purpose of demo, and we'll also look at Azure AD and ID-driven itself. Okay, so let's get on with demo. That's enough PowerPointing. And let's start on premises. So here I am looking at the MIM interface. Now the MIM interface is not very exciting and may not be of interest to all of you. But I want to call out that these are the management agents, the connectors. So for example, no surprise that I'm connecting to Active Directory. No surprise that we've also included an HR system. Down here we've got an ERM system. It isn't a real ERM system. We just got some tables in SQL Server, but it amounts to the same thing. And we've got ADLDS, as it happens, another directory. We've got a few other connectors which I'm not going to go into, which are to do with the way that we like to manipulate data and the various different user scenarios use scenarios that I'm trying to demonstrate and work through. And then also I've got this extensible connectivity MA. This is the connector we've written which connects to ID-driven. So that's the synchronization that's going on. So if we take a look at the data that's sitting in our various systems, I'm going to focus on a particular individual and we'll follow that individual through. So here is Dr. Arlene Huff. She's in the admin department. She's a manager and she's active. There's not much else we can say about that. Now based on that information which is imported by MIM, we make provisioning decisions. So if, for example, we were to look in our ADLDS instance, we'd see that she exists there too. Not very exciting. If we take a look at AD, we'll find that she exists, and she exists in the admin OU. She's been placed there because that's her department. And if we take a look at the memberships that she has, she's in something called all staff, and that's all at the moment. Now, we said that we had a sort of pretend ERM system, and so the way I'm going to show that is I've got a query here, which if I run, just update it, it shows that she has a single permission in this system. What we've got basically is a table of users and a table of permissions, which is, I think, reasonably indicative of a typical situation. Now, how does she get that permission? How does she get the memberships? Well, there are various ways she could get it, but the actual way in this case is through ID-driven. In other words, we're pushing stuff out to ID-driven, and we're pulling back the data that we need. So here is what ID-driven looks like. I'll just go back to the home page. Now, because I've been idle for a while, it signed me out. Let's just sign back in again. So I'm signing in just with my admin account in my tenancy, which is, I happen to call Labrador. I might have mistyped that. No, I didn't. So I'm just using an account, an Azure AD account, which ID-driven knows about as well, by the way. That's how I'm authenticating here. So what we should get is the home page for ID-driven. Now, by the way, my on-premises stuff, I don't really have servers sitting under the desk. I'm simply using Azure virtual machines for that, but in no way does that make it not an on-premises system. It absolutely is. So if I go and look at my users first of all, and by the way, I'm not going to attempt to show you everything in ID-driven, impossible in the time. We shouldn't be surprised that Arlene Huff is here as well. And there are various things we know about her. We know, for example, that she's in a particular OU. It's the admin OU. And that's come from MIM. Now, she's got some roles, and we'll talk about how she gets these roles in a while, but she's only got 2 roles at the moment. Those roles have given her some access rights, and you'll see that she's got access rights in our corporate AD. She's in the all staff group, which we just saw. In the corporate ERM system, she's got that read-only reduced permission, which we just saw. She's also, though, got some permissions within ID-driven itself, a couple of permissions. She's a certification steward, and she's got self-service permission. And because ID-driven is just another application in a sense. And then we've got also in Azure AD, she's in the everyone group. Now, the way that she's got this is through a couple of roles. I'm going to focus on one of them. It's called all staff. Let's go and see how all staff has been configured. The all staff role has been associated with a particular OU. It's the Labrador Corp OU. And if I look up my OUs, I'll see that the Labrador is the parent of all of these. And basically she's inherited that by being in the admin department. She's inherited that role. So everybody basically gets that. And that's the simple way that we've achieved that. And if we look at the permissions associated with this role, these are the permissions on the right that we just saw. So we've got a very, very simple situation. We've got one role applying to everybody. It gives these permissions to this user, and they're pushed back out where they need to go. Okay, so far so good. Now, the way to see something interesting happening is to go into our HR system and make a quite radical change. We're going to move her into a different department entirely, into the HR department. You probably anticipate that the HR department will be associated with some quite interesting permissions. Now, normally, the synchronization service is running in the background all the time. I've just kicked off a synchronization because I want to have complete control over it for the purposes of our demo. But normally, from time to time, periodically, this synchronization would take place, and we'd ensure that everything gets pushed out to ID-driven as needed, the role model's applied, and things come back and are applied. So fairly soon, we would expect to start to see some changes. It all depends how long the cycle takes. Now, at the moment, Arlene is sitting here in the admin department. If I refresh, at some point, I'd expect to see her disappear, and there she just did. And she should turn up in the HR department, and again, I'll refresh and show that there she is. And let's have a look at her memberships now. She's now a member of various other groups. Now, there's lots of ways that we could have made that happen. In fact, MIM could perfectly well have done that itself. But we're doing rather more than that. If we take a look at the pretend ERM system, and I just do a refresh, you'll see that she's got a bunch of new permissions. So, and we could see that reflected in many other systems. So the question is, how did the model do that? Well, we need to go back out to ID driven, and let's have a look at Arlene again. So we'll go back to managing our users, we'll choose Arlene, and we'll have a look at what roles she's now got. And you'll see that she's got some additional roles. No surprise there, she's got the HR roles, and as a result she's got more access rights. Perhaps what's more interesting, and here they all are, perhaps what's more interesting is how that's being defined. So let's take a look at that. Let's go to manage roles, and first of all we'll look at the HR staff role. Now, you can probably guess straight away how this has been done. It's associated with the HR OU, so anybody that's in that OU, that department in other words, gets certain access rights, and they've been defined against this role. I could choose other ones. By the way, I could get from AAD any of the other groups that happen to be in Azure AD. I could go and get other rights, and this is just how we put the model together. Let's look at the HR managers one, which amounts to almost the same thing. It's associated with the HR OU, but in this case there's also an attribute policy on it. So you'll see that job title contains manager. So that's another typical way that we would start to build our role. Now, our role model. Now, I'm not going to go into all sorts of other stuff. There's all kinds of self-service roles and other things that we could be talking about. I'm trying to keep things pretty simple here. So the changes that the model has made just because of the change to Arlene's attributes have already, as you saw, been propagated where they need to go. Now let's just bring Azure AD into the picture as well. Now, I've already said that what we're just going to go back a little bit here. I've already said that my on-premises systems are basically some virtual machines, and these are the virtual machines that we've been looking at. But interesting also, of course, is Active Directory. This is Azure Active Directory. This is here the directory that we're using, and that's been synchronized from our on-premises AD. It's worth a quick look at how that's happened. Okay, here are all the users. Quick look at how that's happened. We'll just go to our domain controller here, and here is something that looks suspiciously like MIM, but actually it's AD Connect, and it's simply connected to our domain, our DC, to on-premises Active Directory, and to Windows Azure AD, and it's synchronizing between them. Now, we could go into how that's done, but that's not the purpose of this webinar. So here are the users, and again, we should be able to find Arlene Huff, and we would find that if we examine Arlene Huff's attributes, that they're going to be just the same as on-premises, and we don't need to go into that just now. We've also got lots of groups, and those groups are permission type object, and so ID Driven has imported all of those and is now managing them. And if I make a change to them, I would expect to see those changes being represented here. So no surprise then that we've got a number of people that are in that group. I notice that she isn't in it yet, but I think that's because I haven't actually started managing that. Let's just take another look at HR staff, and let's see if we can make that happen. Let's make a quick change to the model. If we look at the access rights, you'll see that amongst them is not, as it happens, that group. And it's a bit unscripted actually, I'm going off script here, I haven't done this before. If we go to Azure AD and find our HR, see if we can find it, HR department one, there you'll see I've included it in the model. I'll process that. Now, we may not immediately see the result of this because obviously there are various synchronizations going on and we don't know exactly when they happen. And it may be that we go back and look at it and we can refresh and immediately see that change, but it may be that we don't. Let's have a look. It's worth a shot. But I think you will perhaps trust me that it's managing these just like it's managing anything else in any case. Let's certainly having a good old think about it today. Presumably has to do with all the stuff that's going on our network. And okay, hasn't happened yet, but I think we can safely say that it will happen. I can certainly assure you that the everyone group is being managed. The only way that these members got in here was because of the fact that it's included in the model. Okay, so we've looked at the role model. Now let's look at certification. First of all, a quick word about certification. It's called auto-attestation or even recertification. And it is just one of those facts of life that users will always make sure they get the permissions they need, but they don't usually pester anybody to take them away again afterwards. And because few organizations have a formal role system like we just looked at, the result is that many users have permissions they shouldn't have. And so it's wise to go through some kind of process of checking. That can be a manual process, of course. And if it's automated, well, all the better. So we're talking about checking that users have the right access. And the people that normally do this, that normally attest or certify, we'll refer to them as stewards. And they're usually the managers responsible for the data concerned. In other words, we can delegate the responsibility for this attestation to the people that actually know something about what's going on. So it takes the form of a campaign during which these stewards approve or deny permissions. Now, if ID-driven, in this case, is managing the permissions concerned, it can directly make the necessary changes to the permissions. In other words, it can write back the membership changes to Azure AD or back to our on-premises systems. And it's, by the way, cyclic, which is why we call it recertification, because typically it's going to apply for a number of months, maybe 6 months, and then after 6 months we'll need to do it again. So we have our stewards going in and saying, yeah, that person should have that permission and that person shouldn't. Now that begs a few questions about, well, will they understand what the permissions mean and so on? And one of the, that's something that we will take a look at and discuss a little bit, because we can actually do the attestation based on permissions, but we could make it based on roles or even just accounts. In other words, we could just be talking about whether somebody should have an account at all in the system. We could talk about whether they should have these specific permissions, which may or may not mean something to the manager, or it may be that we've defined a formal role system, and what we're checking is that they have the roles that they should have. And that's a decision that has to be taken. I'm not going to pretend that any of this is going to be easy, but it's worthwhile. So it could be manual. Obviously, huge benefits in being automated. And above all, it must be low friction. So here we've got on the left, we've got all our users. Those users have permissions in various applications, and also they're part of various organizational units, as we've seen. The attestation campaign is going to take all of this info, and it's going to send emails out to the relevant stewards. Those stewards will go into the portal, go into the ID-driven, in this case, portal, and they'll start doing their attestation. If they don't complete it, they'll get reminders, and eventually, hopefully, everybody will make the appropriate decisions, and we will see various permissions being revoked if necessary. So that's what the whole thing looks like. So let's now put that into the form of a demo. I'll just get rid of that. And let's see what that actually looks like. So I'm in ID-driven. We've already seen that I've got the necessary information. By the way, let's just extend that a little bit further, and let's just remind ourselves the information that it has. If I go to Manage Users, I take, and we've been using Arlene Huff all along, we could look at somebody else. Remember that we know what access rights they've got. Now those access rights could have arrived as a result of our role model, which is exactly what's happened here, but it could also be that all we've done is basically suck in the data, and we haven't got a role model yet, and we're simply attesting reality that's out there. Notice also there's something here called licenses. So this opens up something quite interesting, doesn't it? So we're talking about the licenses that this person has in Azure AD. So there's another interesting angle, very interesting to be able to monitor, report on, and potentially even run an attestation campaign on whether somebody's got a particular license or should have a particular license. And you'll see that it's picked up there, AD Premium license there. There are a couple, two licenses, two options within that license as it happens. So that introduces yet something more interesting. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just referring to that in passing. Now, when you look at her roles, among her roles is OU stewards. How did she get to be an OU steward? Well, the permissions that make her a steward within ID Driven are handled in the same way as any other one. We'll have a steward's role, and that role will apply certain rights. The right is a certification steward within ID Driven, over on the right here. If you look at the OUs concerned, it's the top level OU. So what we're saying is that it will be inherited all the way down, but only based on job title contains manager. In other words, we're taking the simple approach, and we could do this in lots of different ways, the simple approach that anybody who's a manager of a particular OU will be a steward in that OU. Okay, what does certification look like? Well, let's go and find certification. And you'll see that I've done lots of tests already, but we'll simply add a new campaign is the easiest thing that we'll do. So I'm going to add a campaign. So we imagine that at some point there's a business requirement or a regulatory requirement, whatever, to do a campaign of a particular kind. So I'm going to call this, with great imagination, I'm going to call it Test 7. Now, I am the owner, the administrator is the owner, but other people could be creating these. I could make it recurrent. If I make it recurrent, then I'm obviously going to define how often it should repeat, but we'll just do this as a single campaign. Well, I'm going to choose a start date, which I'm going to make today, and I'm going to choose an end date, which is the date for which, at the end, the last date for which this campaign can be said to apply to certify us. So I'm going to choose a date about 6 months in the future. I also need to indicate when people, there's a period during which this campaign needs to get underway, and a period during which we need a response from the certifiers or stewards. Now next, and very importantly, we're going to define the scope. And you'll see that at the moment, at least, the way ID Driven does this is either by OU or by application. In other words, we could be certifying our ERM system, or we'd be certifying the entire HR OU. I'm going to choose OU, and I'm going to choose HR because, as it happens, it just is the more interesting one. Now, what kind of campaign are we doing? And you'll see that we can have a campaign that's in terms of permissions or access rights, in terms of roles, or in terms of accounts. Now, in a mature system, a mature model, where everybody understands how the roles relate to the access rights, you can imagine doing it by role, and it would be greatly simplified because there'd probably be relatively few roles. At the moment, it's going to be more interesting to do at the level of access rights, because I'm going to postulate that in this imaginary situation that we've got, the various stewards are going to have some idea what those access rights actually mean, like AD group memberships or Azure group memberships and so on. So I'm going to save that. So it's creating this, and what's also going on at the moment is it's sending the emails out to the various stewards that are going to be doing this. So let's take a look now at this instance. So I need to actually select the instance first. And you'll see that it's telling me that nothing's been processed yet, everything's to do, and that there are 3 people who are presumably managers who are going to be certifiers. And there are 110 actions that need to be taken. So in other words, 110 permissions here to be certified. As I say, in a real situation, and in a mature situation, you would want to reduce the number of decisions people have to take by perhaps looking at roles rather than permissions. So what's going to happen? Well, I won't bother going and reading the email. That won't achieve very much, but we could do. But Arlene, for example, will have got an email, and that email will encourage her to go and start certifying. Let's now open up another browser. Just for simplicity, I'll use a different browser, and I'm going to sign in. But I'm going to sign in, obviously not as the administrator this time, but as Arlene, and I need her password. And you'll see this is the normal logon for Azure AD. So we're simply leveraging the fact that we're sitting on Azure Active Directory here. Now, because she's not an administrator, she's going to have relatively little that she can do. And you'll see over here that there's some self-service that she could do. I'm not going to be covering that today, but she could be doing some certification. So let's go and have a look at that. And you'll see that these are the campaigns that are available to her. We're going to take test 7. And it's showing her, again, that there are other people that might be doing the certification, but she's going to say, oh, well, let's start certifying. And it's going to come up with, hopefully, a bunch of users. And you'll see that where the first person in the list is Aaron Moore. If we scroll down, sorry, if we page through is what I meant to say, we'll see that there are other users, Adrian, Alan Piper, Arlene herself. Well, we could have a little think about if it makes sense for her to be certifying herself, but let's not go down that route right now. There's Bernard Brown and so on. And you'll see that for each of them, we've got all of the access rights. These access rights are associated obviously with the HROU because they're all in the HROU, but you can see which application they're associated with. So we're going to be making changes that could relate to the corporate ERM system, to ID-driven itself, to our corporate AD, or to Azure AD. And let's start the process. So let's just go back to the beginning. So Aaron Moore, basically the job is to go through and say, yep, supposed to have that, supposed to have that, supposed to have that, and so on down the list. And we'll, perhaps just for variety say, no, we don't think they should have that permission, we don't think they should have that permission, and so on. And it should have that permission. And just carry on down the list doing this kind of thing. Another possibility is that they look at a particular user and say, I don't know anything about that user, and so I'm going to reject that and say that it's not what I'm going to do. And that's really just going to send a message back to the administrator to say, well, they've rejected that, maybe somebody else has got to do it instead. And the other thing is that we could leave a message as well. Okay, oops, so let's go and see what effect that's had. Okay, we're back now in the administrative section, and we're looking at the instance as a whole. I'll refresh that, and with a bit of luck, we'll see that there is now some progress. And there we go. And you'll see that we've now processed some of these, but there are some of them still to go. So you get the idea, and this we would continue doing this. And in a large organization, the chart at the bottom left will be a bit more meaningful. We can see that 11 items have been rejected because I rejected that person. All the 11 items under that person have been rejected, and still 7 days to go, and so on. And in this way, the campaign would continue. Now, I don't know how much we can fit in the time. I want to leave some time for QA, although I don't actually see any questions. So let's take this a little further. Back in on our MIM server, generally speaking, the synchronization would be going on. Changes that have been made to the membership, you'd expect to see happening, being brought in and obviously synchronized with the various systems. So we'll take a look at, it was I've actually forgotten who it was, so I'll have to just go back and remind myself who the first person in that list was. Let's just go back and, oops, sorry. And it was Aaron Moore. Now, I don't know whether this will have happened yet, but we can give it a try. So let's have a look at Aaron Moore. Or was it Moore, one R, one without an E, sorry. And we see that their permissions have been reduced. Of course, we didn't look at it before and after, but if you remember, the permissions would have been exactly the same as for Arlene. Arlene had more permissions than that, and so you'll see that they've been reduced. Okay, so let's go back to our PowerPoint and just summarize what we've been looking at a little bit. So in summary, we would say that ID-driven fits a behold-sized hole, but it's cloud-based, and that means that we've immediately got the ability to handle Azure AD as well, and in fact, it very naturally does that. It can also connect, by the way, to SaaS apps such as Salesforce. And it's more feature-rich. What we find is that there are way more things going on in ID-driven itself. I mean, zone-based access control being one. Also, there's just more flexibility in the way that you can handle the model. But it also is more rich in the sense of the API that's available. And so we found that we've been able to pull the data back in more interesting ways. And it greatly simplifies the job within MIM, within Microsoft Identity Manager, to flow the right data out, the right permission data out to various systems. So it can provide this roles engine for on-premises MIM and or cloud. It can also handle certification, as you've seen, and again, that's for on-premises and or cloud, and many other things. So that's really all I've intended to show you today. I think I've talked fairly fast and come inside my allotted time, but I did also intend to leave time for any questions. So if you have any questions, now is a really good time to ask them. By typing in, I think, is what we would say. If you haven't got any questions, then I'm going to say that that's all I've got, and thanks very much for attending. If you'd like to know more about this, then respond to the follow-up email that we'll be sending out. You can always contact us through info@oxfordcomputergroup.com anyway, but if we can help you with your implementation or just with information, then please let us know.